In my last video, I talked about I'm a big system guy. What gets me excited about a new RPG is the rules, much more than the setting. I find most setting stupid and poorly designed, to be honest. The world presented are often like nonsensical, and I will rip them off the game and replace them with something I like better, or at least heavily correct them. But like I said before, you can't really design a world that makes sense if you cannot make sense of the world we live in to begin with. And the people in power will make sure that you can't make sense of the world we live in. Anyway, one thing that I find fascinating in game design, especially with tabletop design, is how the designers manage to create rules that are simple enough to be managed without a computer, but complex enough to be engaging. And also to do an appropriate, not simulation, but approximation of the world. What we try to do in RPG is complex. The player can basically do anything that could be realistically done in the game world. So we have to cover a lot of case, but we don't have to have specific rules for every situation. Of course, a lot can be left to the GM fiat, but leave too much to be done as ruling, and why have rules at all at this point? I like also our rules can convey a specific feel for a game. And there's a lot of role-playing games, a shit ton of them, and most of them are very derivative. We have a bunch of retro clones and OSR games that are basically all do the same thing, that they vary on very small details, but the core is the same. And at the time of 3 and the original OGL, we had all kind of spin on 3rd edition. And I'm not saying that those games have no reason to exist. Having a different setting is reason enough to justify a different game, even though it's not something that excites me much personally. And even if you keep the same core as another game, you could introduce one mechanic that make it distinct enough to make it a better choice for a group over any other game. And even if what you bring about is only better writing and clearer rule explanation, better presentation, that is also a valid contribution to the hobby. But what I wanted to talk about are games that have specific rules or a general approach that really alter the feel of a game. And this is not about telling you about very obscure games that you never heard before about. It's mostly to make you think about how mechanics affect a game. So let's start with something easy and simple. I assume most of you heard of a Dungeon Crawl Classic, DCC, and one thing that this game does that is really clever is the character funnel, where every player starts with the first adventure with 4 level 0 characters, and if one of them or more survive, then they pick one to promote him to a level 1, and now this will be their character for the rest of the game. And this already set a tone for the game. You know it's meant to be greedy. You know it's a game where life is cheap, where adventuring is dangerous. You do not start as a hero. And the fact that they also have you roll for spell, and that using magic will corrupt you over time, also implies something about the world. It will necessarily mean that it's a world that is more low magic. And it doesn't have to be stated in the fluff box, because the mechanics imply it. But outside of that, the games play fairly similarly to most OSR games. Torchbearer is a game that really changed how the game is played. There's a 2nd edition that has been put out, but I don't have it. And the author of the game are kind of like shitlib. Most creative people are. Liberal are the one willing to explore new idea, and conservative like iterate on established idea and refine them and make them real good, because a lot of those original game has a lot of issue and they would need more polish. They have an interesting idea, but they would need some work. So it's a shame that liberals and conservatives cannot get along anymore, because we could do good thing if we could, but our side have compromised enough. Anyway, in this game, the game is based on the Burning Wheel, but it's like if the Burning Wheel had an OSR treatment. And the game is very much a dungeon crawl. You play character who go adventuring for profit to loot ancient tombs and dungeon, and they are not heroes, they're pretty much loser. And what really informs how you play the game is the mechanic of condition. You only make rolls when you attempt something hard or significant. But at every time you make a roll, you have to check a condition on your character sheet. And the first condition are not too bad. You get hungry and thirsty, and then you get angry, and then you get afraid and exhausted. And those are easy enough to solve when you get back to camp. You eat, you drink, you relax a bit, you sleep. But if you have to check more condition, then you get into things like sick and injured, and dead is the final condition. So with this, it really influenced like how the game is played. It really like you play the game, you change the way you approach a situation. Adventuring now it makes it feel like adventuring is something that sucks and that you do out of necessity. So you face a cliff, or you're gonna climb, or you're gonna try to scale the cliff, which would require a roll and for you to take a condition, or would you go around the long way, and that should be safer, but we know what can happen. So if you're looking for a game where players act more carefully and they think before they act, and where the character get beaten down by adventuring, this mechanic really promote that. Another game I like a lot is King Arthur Pendragon and Paladin, which is the same system, but Paladin is set in Charlemagne's court, where Pendragon is in King Arthur's. And in those games, oh, by the way, I prefer the setting of Paladin, but the rules are much better written in Pendragon. Paladin kind of made it worse, even though like it's written, it came out after, which is a shame. But in those games, you play a knight. You don't play a magic user. You don't play a commoner. You don't play an elf. You play a knight, a human knight. And if you think this is limiting on roleplay, well, you have a lot to learn about roleplay. And guess what? Playing Pendragon will teach you something about it. Because knight is a social class. And even if all your character comes from the same social class, they can be very different. In fact, the fact that you all come from the same social class, you all a knight, force you to differentiate your character in other ways than by race or class. And to help with that, there's a system of virtues that is core to the game. Your character has a bunch of traits which are all matched up in pair, and the total of a pair always add up to 20. And there are stuff like chaste or lustful, energetic versus lazy, prudent versus reckless. And when you act in accordance to one of those traits, you can roll for it, and if you succeed, you get a bonus to whatever you're trying to achieve, and it's a significant one. In Pendragon, you do stuff by rolling a 20-sided dice. You have to roll under your skill, but as high as you can. And if you roll exactly your skill, it's a crit. And you can raise your skill above 20 with those with those virtue bonus. And when you do so, you know you will succeed, but also everything above 20 expand the crit range. So if you have like a 25 in your skill after bonus and all, you're gonna succeed. But on everything between a 15 and a 20, is gonna be on the dice is gonna be a crit. So you're very much incentivized to act according to those character traits. They're not just a guide as to how you should roleplay. They have real mechanical impact. And if you try to act on the trail but fail the test, there are consequences. You get depressed, you get mad, you get violent. So the game is about those passionate nights full of those violent emotion, and there's no place for stoicism in there. That's cool because it really mimics those old story where the character overreact to everything. There's also another very cool thing about Pendragon is the way that in the game the time passes. Your knight is supposed to go on one adventure a year or one military campaign, so your character ages really quickly. And it's designed that at some point you marry, you have children, and you retire, or maybe you die, and then the player continue play with the son of the original knight, and so it's a generational play. And the goal of the game is to get glory, and that's what you're after. You go on quests, you participate in important battle to get glory. You can get glory from court event. The whole thing is very cool. And if you're not into the Arthurian cycle, you can easily like rip the setting off and place the game in any kind of more or less historical setting. The game does have fantastical element, but it's very toned down. There's another game I want to talk about a bit. It's not a game I own because it was published by Evil Hat, and that's taking it too far to me. I won't purchase anything from those guys. But the game is Blades in the Dark, and it does have a cool mechanic that really give it a specific feel. And I'm not talking about the clocks. Everybody raves about the clocks, but the clocks are just trackers. It's not a new thing. The fact that you put them on circle, divided into quarter or in 8 or in 6, it doesn't make it revolutionary. I guess this is the case of presenting an old mechanics with better language, make it feel better. You know, it's a clock and you have ticks, you know. But really, if it was a linear tracker, a linear track, it would do the same thing. Anyway, that's not what I want to talk about here. Blades in the Dark is a game that is designed for a specific type of play. A little bit like Pendragon, but in Blade, instead of playing a knight, you play some kind of scoundrel, a thief, or an assassin, or something, some kind of criminal. And it's a heist game. But what they do that's really cool is that they have a mechanic of flashback or foresight, where you can do the planning as you're playing the heist. So instead of having players spending hours trying to plan for everything before you start the job, you jump right in. And when a problem arises, you can inject that you had planned something from that. So the planning phase is kind of done retroactively as you are doing the heist. So if you want to do a heist game that is not going to be like boring or not going to be like overly cerebral, that's a clever way to do it. And it really mimics those heist movie where everyone is also clever and always have pre-planned a solution to all kind of problems that arise. So those are some example of games with mechanics that really alter the feel of a game. And I think it's something that should be considered when a game is designed. What is your game bringing to the table? Are you just doing a rewrite of a classic but with some cleanup? And if that's what you're doing, that's fine. Like I said, many of those newfangled games could use some iteration to make them cleaner, better written, or to fix some rule issue they have. But if you want to give like a different feel, you should think about what your mechanics says about your game. Vampire the Masquerade was a big hit in the 90s, and the creator wanted to make a game of political intrigues and existential angst. But the mechanics all indicate that it's basically a superhero game. It's very actiony with violent fight and superpower. Your character didn't feel like a tortured soul. It felt like a superhero. It's also something to consider when you're homebrewing. When you homebrew a game. The other night on Viktor's Gorchev and Crossface show, they were talking about the O5R, which is a returning Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition to how it was in 2014, or giving 5th edition a more OSR feel, a more old school feel. And this is related to this conversation we're having here, because it's about how to give a feel to a game via mechanics. Is there a mechanics that you can alter to change the feel of the game? And how changing a mechanic will affect the feel, you know? One thing that was mentioned is the optional rules to switch short rest and long rest to 8 hours and a week, respectively. And I think this is the correct way to play 5e. You bring the power level way down immediately by doing that. But Crossface was proposing something different, where you don't change the short and long rest duration, but you reduce how much HP you get back. And if you do that, you change the balance of the game quite a bit. Now you're incentivizing players to play Spellcaster, because you make them relatively much more powerful since they regain their spell slot normally, but martial class don't regain their HP normally. So if this is not what you're trying to do, and I don't think the caster in 5e need to be made more appealing than they already are, well, then you have like a unintended consequence, and that's not a good way to do game design. I'll put the link to Viktor's show in the description below. Anyway, this is what I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you think about all this down below. Is there a game you know that have like cool mechanic that completely change its feel? Share them down. And thank you for watching. Have a good day and take care.